gotta.
So now I gotta go back to my slideshow
And share.
Sorry, no, it's okay. You're good. I'll just start from the beginning again. Okay. Now we are officially recording. So I'll just start out one more time and say, welcome everybody to the Washtenaw County Conservation District 74th Annual Meeting. Let's continue on. But now I've lost my other screen. Program for the event. Thank you. The program for the event should be included in your Zoom virtual invite email. The chat box will allow attendees to ask questions, comments. Staff will monitor the chat box for questions. And door prizes will be awarded at the close of the meeting. And a recording of this meeting, which we have figured out officially, is being recorded. So our agenda. Oops. The agenda. So we'll have our welcome and introductions, and then our featured program with Dr. Asia Dowtin, an assistant professor of urban and community forestry at MSU. We'll have our 2021 successes, our 2021 conservation awards, then our director election results, and finally we will adjourn and have our door prizes. So that is a little bit what we'll be doing this evening. For an introduction for myself, my name is Jill Donor and I'm the vice chairwoman of the Conservation District Board. This evening we are joined by Matt Nolan, the treasurer, Shannon Brines, secretary, Howard Zeiss, director, Hannah Weber, associate director. Lastly, we'd like to thank our recently retired board chairman, Matt Kahn, for 17 years of service with the Conservation District. Very impressive. We are joined by our Washtenaw County Conservation District staff, Megan Delau, executive director, Doug Reith, our resource coordinator, Nick Machensky, our meat technician, Erez Brandbang, conservation technician, Summer Roberts, the community forester, and Drew Mark Wilson, outreach coordinator. We also work in cohort with the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and their staff is Solomon Andrews, the district conservationist, Ashley Holloway, and Katie Beevine are the soil conservationists there. All right, now on to our featured guest and our presentation. Tonight we have Dr. Asia Dowtin, the associate professor at Michigan State University. Dr. Asia Dowtin is in the Department of Forestry. Her work explores the relationship that exists between urban canopy structure, spatial context, and plant-water interactions, and is intended to broaden our understanding of the influence of species composition and surrounding land use on urban forest function. A major goal of Dowtin's work is to utilize this knowledge to inform the development of urban forest management plans, specifically those intended to optimize yield of select regulating and supporting ecosystem services by municipal trees. She holds an extension appointment, which she uses in part to aid in the development of arboriculture and urban forestry educational materials for K-12 curriculum, continuing education, and workforce development program. She earned her MS and PhD in geography from the University of Delaware and her BS in meteorology from the State University of New York College of Oneida. Welcome, Dr. Dowtin.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit of my research with you. And really to having a conversation with the group tonight about trees and water in our cities in Washtenaw County and across Michigan. I know we're in webinar mode, so we can't have a full-on conversation, but I will definitely be asking questions throughout the presentation. So feel free to maybe throw some responses in the chat or even on your notebook. My hope is that through the questions, I can, we can work together to stir up some thoughts and and maybe help make this all the more interactive, if you will. So tonight, again, like I said, thank you all again for the opportunity to speak with you. And I'll be sharing a little bit about my work and my thoughts on expanding our knowledge of urban trees and water, lessons learned from research, some lessons learned from practice, and the overall management implications for what we've been learning through the years. So, first question of the night, what good are trees in our cities anyway? What is, are they overall good? Is it a net positive? Is it a mix of negative and positive? Why do we vouch for trees as hard as we do here in Michigan and other cities, and cities with not just within Michigan, but across the US and really the world? And the answer to this question is pretty dynamic and it's pretty heavy. The reality of it is when we're thinking about trees in our cities, there are myriad benefits that they make available to us, some of which are tangible or visible with the naked eye through increasing biodiversity in our cities, also reducing temperature in certain parts of our cities where we tend to have higher temperatures due to all the development that's taken place. And some of the impacts of trees in our cities are actually really seen with respect to human health and well-being. And so in communities where there's a higher tree canopy cover, you tend to see lower incidences of respiratory illnesses, also lower incidences of obesity among the population, and overall an improved quality of life. But beyond the temperature, beyond the personal and public health benefits, there are also very obvious and quantifiable environmental benefits linked to having trees in our cities. And some are linked to air quality improvements, but what we're going to focus tonight is really my favorite, and I'm just going to pull up my pointer. And that is the benefits that are linked to the presence of trees in our cities and stormwater. You all may have noticed over the past year here in Michigan, there's been a lot of current events, a lot of news being made with respect to heavy rains that we've had in our cities and flooding that's ensued. And there's been a lot of subsequent conversations from members of the planning community, research communities, about what we can do to reverse the tide. We don't want to continue to see these excessive floods and the negative impacts that has on human safety, infrastructure. And so we're really thinking long and hard about how can we increase the amount of trees we have in the city for the sake of managing stormwater among these other benefits. So we can talk about Michigan all day. I know I can at least, but like I said, it's important to note that these are conversations that are being had not just in Michigan, but around the world, and specifically around cities in the US. And so that question is, again, what's the good of trees? What are they doing for us, and how can we actually kind of quantify that? And so what I want to do for just a half a second is look at a few cities across the US, looking in the Southwest, West Coast, Southeast, Midwest, and New York. And then also look at some of the benefits that folks tend to associate trees with providing in our cities, ranging from energy savings to reduction in carbon dioxide, air quality improvement, and stormwater mitigation. And I'm just going to ask you all to take a few seconds to just look across the table and note the economic value associated with each of these benefits. And take a few seconds, see if there's anything that stands out to you, anything that makes you say, or something that you find exceptionally interesting. All right, so lock it in, whatever's catching your eye. And I'll tell you what caught my eye when I first looked at these numbers. It was really looking at the data out of Charlotte, Indianapolis, and New York. And, we can look across the board and see that for each of these savings or each of these services, the savings that are provided or the benefits that are provided by trees have a really high value. But when you look specifically at Charlotte, Indianapolis, and New York, you see that these values, especially those related to stormwater mitigation provided by urban trees, far outweighs the value of all the other services that these trees are providing. So for example, we'll just look at Charlotte, and you got about $2 million a year in savings that the city is reaping in terms of trees capturing that precipitation, reducing the load on the sewer systems, reducing the risk of flooding, and ultimately saving the city water management office's money. The same rough estimate number is true for Indianapolis, so about $2 million a year in valued benefits provided by trees relating to stormwater management. And then my favorite number, and I'm slightly biased, I'm from New York, but I think this is just such a captivating figure here, $33 million in savings related to trees and how they help to reduce stormwater in the city and the load that that relieves the city in terms of having to deal with stormwater as it, as it's produced during various rainstorms. That is not an insignificant figure. And it's not insignificant when you look at it at a macro citywide scale. It's also pretty impressive when you look at it at an individual scale. And so in as much as there has been work done to look at the entire urban canopy within these different cities and what the canopy provides on a macro scale with respect to these benefits, these stormwater related benefits, there's also been work done to look at the value of each individual tree and essentially to determine what is the return on investment for every tree that's planted when it comes to looking at the benefit that each tree provides regarding stormwater. And so just to highlight a couple of examples, in Indianapolis, they found that for every tree planted, there's a little over $16 return on investment that tree provides in terms of helping to reduce the stormwater loads in the city. In New York, that value is more than about quadrupled, if you will, and the value is $61 per tree in terms of money invested in planting and maintaining that tree versus the value that you get out of it from stormwater mitigation. And ultimately, these numbers are important because they're highlighting a very important fact. These urban trees are valuable for sentimental reasons, for health-related reasons, but when it comes down to talking to city planners, conservation district planners, we all know it's a matter of dollars and cents. And now we have a way to quantify economically how these trees are benefiting us. And these are numbers that you can take and make solid planning decisions on. So knowing all of this, we know that these trees provide benefits. We know that these benefits are valued or can be valued at an economic level. But one thing that's true of both Indianapolis and New York, and unfortunately cities across the US, Canada, and honestly the world, is that all these benefits that are being provided by trees in terms of stormwater mitigation are oftentimes being provided by a very small number of species. And when you're looking down a street and every species, all the trees are of similar species, visually it's pleasing, but in the event of a pest, an infestation, a fungal an instance in a city, having a small number of species puts us at risk of losing a significant proportion of the canopy and ultimately the stormwater benefits that come along with the canopy cover. And so this makes us start thinking, if we can value our trees for the stormwater mitigation benefits that they provide, then we should also be thinking about how do we select the best trees that are going to provide that benefit. And wait, are there differences in how these trees provide this benefit? If so, should we be advocating for selecting and maintaining ideal tree species to get us towards a given municipality's goal of using trees to help manage stormwater? These are the questions that I can admit keep me up at night, that keep me going during the day. And my hope is that through today's talk, we'll be able to address them and hopefully you'll be able to walk away with a few answers to these questions. So let's just provide a little background so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about urban trees, stormwater mitigation, and how we, in the research community, draw a connection between the two. So let's talk about some key terms. You'll hear me say this one multiple times throughout the rest of the talk. Interception by the canopy. Well, what's meant by that? I like to always ask the question, if it rains on a tree in any given city, what are all the different things that can happen to that raindrop, right? Or the multitude of raindrops that will fall on that tree. And the reality is there's quite a few things that can happen, especially when you're looking at processes that take place above ground. And it's these above ground processes that we use to develop a baseline understanding of how effectively a tree is going to capture rainfall, and then essentially how effectively a tree is going to help to reduce or mitigate runoff in our cities. And so to that point, let's talk really briefly about those 3 potential things that can happen to rain that falls on trees in our cities. The first is interception. And when we talk about interception, we're essentially talking about the capture of precipitation on the surfaces of our trees. This can be the foliar or leaf surfaces. It can also be the woody surfaces, such as branches and stems within the tree. So water that's intercepted, for the most part, never makes it below the canopy, never makes it to the ground. It's captured and really prevented from becoming stormwater. So that's where the big mitigation benefit comes in. So if we can quantify interception, we're in a good place to quantify how much stormwater is going to be mitigated. Now, not everything that interacts with the canopy is going to be intercepted. Some will eventually make its way through the canopy. And when it does that, there's 2 categories that we put it in. The first of which is throughfall. And throughfall is essentially that precipitation that passes through the canopy. It may touch a leaf on its way down. It may touch a branch. It may also fall through gaps in the canopy and then essentially make its way to the soil. Then there's also stem flow, which is my personal favorite, but that's precipitation that interacts with an upper part of the canopy and eventually drains to the main stem or the trunk of the tree and follows the path along the trunk down to the soil. When we are thinking about urban trees and how they contribute to stormwater mitigation, we actually need to be thinking about all 3 of these potential fates. That is, again, interception, throughfall, and stem flow. And the way and the reason in which we think about these things actually puts us in a position to determine how effectively these trees in our cities are capturing rainfall or precipitation. And so to do that, we follow some relatively simple math that takes into account how much rain is falling in open parts of our city, which we can measure using like weather stations. And then we also take into account how much rain is falling beneath the canopy. So how much throughfall is making its way through, how much stem flow is making its way through. And if you have measurements of open rainfall, throughfall, and stem flow, then you can actually rearrange this simple equation up at the top so that we are solving for interception. In other words, if you've got those rainfall measurements, those throughfall measurements, and those stem flow measurements, you can actually calculate interception. And it's through this calculation that we are in a really solid position to determine, again, how effective are these trees at capturing this rainfall and preventing it from making its way to our surface water systems, our sidewalks, and potentially causing localized flooding issues. So, brief reflection, I told you we'd have a few questions throughout the course of the talk. Here comes the next round of them. Again, I'll read them out loud. Feel free to process on your own. But question number 1 is, now that we know a little bit about interception, throughfall, and stem flow, what type of physical tree traits do you think actually influence each of them? What do we even mean when we say physical tree traits? So, be thinking about this. What physical tree traits do you think may influence interception, throughfall, and stem flow? Are they the same traits? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see in a few minutes. And then the other thing that we want to be thinking about is, let's see, do differences in tree traits cause large or noticeable enough variation in interception, throughfall, and stem flow that we can actually measure it and kind of be surprised by it? I don't know. Well, actually, I do know. And in a few minutes, you all will know the answer to that question as well. All right, so let's dive right into this. What are the tree traits that impact rainfall distribution by the canopy? Now, there are like these terms that I kind of use interchangeably all the time. I'm going to try to catch myself if I start going down that tangent. Rainfall distribution by the canopy is one of them. And so that we're all on the same page, I will share that rainfall distribution by the canopy means the same thing that we just talked about. So is that rainfall that hits the tree going to become throughfall, stem flow, or will it be intercepted? We'll look at the tree traits that determine that. So first and foremost, some key things to know going into this conversation. when it comes to tree traits and rainfall distribution, the answer, let's just put it out there. There are various tree traits that will influence rainfall distribution by the canopy, that will influence how well a tree is able to intercept rainfall or convert it to through fuller stem flow. And let's be honest about the fact that yes, there are various traits, and no, they do not operate independently of each other. So there's this dynamic interplay between these traits that, you know, one may influence the other, which may amplify what we're looking to measure in the long term. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's really important to identify what those moving parts are up front, because then we can have a better idea of understanding which tree species may have these different parts, and then use that information to make decisions about which trees we might be selecting, planting, and maintaining. And the other thing to keep in mind, which is exciting, but it's a lot to just keep in mind, is the fact that you have all these dynamic traits that are working off of each other, but those traits are going to change over the lifespan of a tree. We're talking about like changes over the course of a year, and changes from when you plant that tree earlier on in its life to when it's fully mature. And so all of these things need to be identified first and foremost, and then taken into account. And if you have an opportunity, measured, so that you can really understand how effectively a tree, again, is helping to capture precipitation. All right, so we're going to dive in to some of these traits. Some of these slides may be a little busy. I'm going to try to break down everything so we're all on the same page. And this will be conceptual up front, and then I promise we'll switch gears and look at some actual data on the tail end of the talk today. So let's look at the first of these traits, right? And we're going to go through quite a few, but one trait that is very important when we're trying to figure out how effective a tree is going to be at capturing that rainfall, at intercepting precipitation, is a trait that's affiliated with the foliar characteristics of the tree, or the leaves. And one of those leaf traits that we use, it is like almost top of the list when you start looking at what we call urban forest hydrology. One of those top tree traits is what we call the leaf area index, or LAI. And LAI is essentially used to determine how much area above the ground is occupied by leaves. So essentially, we're starting to think about those tree traits that may impact interception. If you have more area above ground that is occupied by leaves, you essentially have what we call high LAI, a high leaf area index. That high leaf area index is affiliated with higher interception. And it's a pretty simple relationship. More leaf area, more leaf surfaces, essentially mean more surfaces that water, precipitation, I should say, can be intercepted on and not make its way down to the soil or our sidewalks. On the flip side, when you have low LAI, so a relatively low amount of leaf surface area, you don't have as many surfaces that precipitation can be intercepted on. And essentially, you get lower interception. Lower interception means higher throughfall, more water is making it down to the soil. All right, let's move on to our next trait. So LAI is one, lock that in. That's all about the leaves, but there's also, like we said, dynamic traits, dynamic interplay between the traits. So not only are our leaves determining how much precipitation is going to be captured by a tree, but the bark is playing a really, really cool role on this as well. And so the texture of your bark, the morphology of your bark, the arrangement of plates, if you will, on the bark are also going to have an influence on how much, or whether or not, I should say, rainfall gets captured and intercepted by the bark or flushes through pretty nicely. And so one of the things that we look at is how smooth or rough is your bark, and how aligned are the furrows, the cracks, if you will, that sort of traverse the tree bark. We'll look at that in a few minutes. But what I want to point out is the general relationship to remember. And that is, if you've got relatively smooth bark, that tree is going to be really effective at flushing water down, draining water down to the soil. If we're trying to work on interception, we don't necessarily want to go in the direction of trees that have smooth bark. We want to go on the other side of that equation, and that's looking at trees that have more rough bark. That more rough bark is going to be very effective at sort of capturing that precipitation and storing it, rather than allowing it to drain. And it's that rough bark characteristic that's really ideal when you're looking at rainfall interception by urban trees and maybe thinking about optimizing or maximizing the interception you can get from your canopy. What you're also going to want to pay attention to outside of your foliar characteristics and your bark characteristics is the canopy structure. And when I say canopy structure, I'm talking about how are your branches oriented? Are they more horizontally oriented? Are they more vertically oriented? The difference between the two is that the more vertical orientation you have, the more effective that tree is going to be at capturing the rainfall and eventually funneling it to that main stem, creating stem flow. And that may not be ideal if we're trying again to, lock up that water in the tree. On the flip side, if you've got more horizontally aligned branches, they may be more effective at releasing water from the canopy. And the same is true for downward sloping branches. And so that may also not be as ideal for capturing precipitation. And so there's a lot to consider here. Again, complex interplay of all these traits. So I'm going to show you a couple of schematics that kind of summarize what we've looked at, and then we'll go from there. So canopy characteristics that promote rainfall capture, in addition to what we just talked about, but also linked. When you've got a canopy that has a high crown projection area, in other words, you've got a crown that kind of spreads out nice and wide, this is going to be pretty effective at capturing precipitation. Essentially, it's going to have a larger expansive surface area that water can be, or precipitation can be captured on. And that is going to be a thumbs up in the right direction of promoting rainfall capture or interception by the canopy. Again, linked to our LAI, if you have a tree that has a high canopy density, in other words, it's thick with the branches, it's thick with the leaves, that is going to be really effective at capturing precipitation. Again, linked to surface area and more surface area for rainfall to be intercepted by. And then one other thing that we didn't talk about, but is also really important, is what we call the adaxial surface roughness, or really how rough is the top part of a leaf. Because if it's sort of like that bark, right? If it's tough and rough, it's going to be a lot more effective at kind of capturing precipitation and locking it in. When that happens, we refer to it as a leaf surface that's hydrophilic. That means it loves water, it likes to hold on to water. And so if you have a rough leaf surface, you're going to be in good shape to kind of capture that precipitation before it makes its way down to the surface. And when I say the surface, I'm again meaning sidewalks and impervious surfaces that are phenomenal at generating runoff. All right, so these are the traits that we can think of with like being really good at capturing rainfall, intercepting rainfall. And this may be what we want to think about when we're thinking about what trees may display these traits. And are these the ones that we want to think about when we're selecting trees for our city, especially if we have like these stormwater issues? Now, there's always two sides to every coin, right? And so there are also tree traits that make them phenomenal at draining precipitation. In other words, not capturing it. In other words, promoting its, eventual transport to the surfaces below. And so on the flip side, some traits that are affiliated with drainage include downward sloping branches. These pretty much promote the passage of precipitation down to the soil with minimal hindrance. Then we also have low canopy density. So this is just the converse of what we said on the other side. But when you have low canopy density, oftentimes, as you can see here, there's sparse vegetation. There may be, sparse foliage, sparse woody vegetation in the canopy, and a lot of gaps through which water or precipitation can make its way down to the surfaces below. And another thing that may promote the drainage of precipitation and not the capture of precipitation is the roughness of the leaf. So again, that top of the leaf, if there's a low roughness on the top side of the leaf, then the leaf is not as effective at capturing and retaining precipitation. When you have more, or I should say less rough leaf surfaces, essentially you have leaves that are what we refer to as hydrophobic. It's almost like they're afraid of water. They don't have an affinity to hold on to it. And so those characteristics are linked with release of precipitation by the canopy. And then just to provide a side by side, on the left here, we've got those traits that promote rainfall capture. And on the left, we've got those traits that promote rainfall drainage and just make those trees less effective at helping us reach our stormwater management goals. All right, so that's on the leaf or the canopy side of things. I did mention earlier that there are bark characteristics that are affiliated with effective precipitation capture, and then others that are not. So when we're looking at like effective precipitation capture by the canopy, bark texture makes a huge difference. And so there are some of the textural traits that we look at and affiliate with rainfall interception by a tree include bark that may have a more scaly texture, or bark that may have what we call interstitched furrows that sort of traverse the bark vertically. And what happens here is we can think about this as more of a intricate bark characteristic that ultimately leads to more rough conditions. And those rough conditions essentially create an environment in which precipitation can't really flow that well down to the base of the tree and eventually gets caught up in some of these surface materials. And so imagine during a rainfall, this precipitation makes its way to the bark. In a rougher bark situation, you may have it play out something like this, where the precip just kind of, it's a little bit of a hindrance to get it to the base. Getting locked up, that's what we're looking for if we're aiming for interception. On the flip side, there are some bark characteristics that are so phenomenal at draining that precipitation, getting it down to the soil or the sidewalk, and potentially, depending on the material on the surface, actually contributing to stormwater runoff. And so we found through the research that some of those traits are linked to or are kind of evident in the form of like shallow linear furrows being present on a tree, or again, bark that has like a really, really, really smooth texture. And for each of these categories, I've included a few species that display these traits. But I did also want to show what it looks like when you have precipitation that interacts with bark like this. And it's a pretty smooth flow down, or relatively smooth flow down to the base of the tree, and oftentimes in higher volumes. And so as we're starting to think again, all right, so yes, tree traits matter. How do they matter? There are some traits that are going to contribute to effective capture of precipitation by a tree, and there are others that are going to really not do that. Instead, they're going to actually help that tree sort of serve as a vehicle through which precipitation can be transported to the surface. And if we've got stormwater management in mind, then we want to go with those traits that are going to promote that rainfall capture. So we've got the background knowledge. How do we then start scaling this up to make sense of it all, to start really figuring out what's happening in our local urban forest? And then how do we use this to make important management decisions? We're going to go through a quick study, or we're going to quickly go through a study that I had done that looked at this, and I'll just show you how we actually get the data to answer these questions. And so this work was based in my time in Delaware, but we are replicating these studies and expanding them here in Michigan, but the methods are still the same. And what I want to do just briefly is show you that for the sites in Delaware and very similar to here, we have different sites. This study was based in Wilmington, which is the largest city in Delaware. And within Wilmington, we took data from various research plots, really to determine how effectively, well, I should say each of the research plots were public parks within the city or remnant woodlots within the city. And the goal was to determine how how trees in each of those parks or woodlots was effectively capturing or intercepting precipitation, or not so much doing that. So again, we looked at this on different levels. We looked to see how parks across the city were behaving. So sort of like an intra-regional or intra-urban impact. Within each park, we started looking at how do different tree species behave. And then we spanned out and looked at this across the entire like Wilmington metropolitan region. We're not going to look at the trans-regional stuff today. We'll focus more on the intra-urban and the intra-fragment observations. All right, so how did we go about collecting that data? If you remember where we started, we were talking about through fall and stem flow and getting that type of information. Well, this is how you do it. This is how you do it on a budget. There's way more sophisticated ways to collect through fall and stem flow. We had limited funds for this study, and so we did the best with what we could, or with what we had. And so what you'll notice where my pointer is now is this milk jug. It's essentially a milk jug ordered from a scientific company with a funnel on top. And that served as our through fall collector. And we basically anchored that into the ground using garden stakes. So we had at each site 25 through fall collectors distributed below the canopy. And then we also had 7 or 8 stem flow collectors. And as you can see here, we've had a beautiful northern red oak. We collected from both northern red oaks and white oaks. And for each of the trees that we collected stem flow from, we essentially installed a collar around the trunk of the tree, about 3.5 feet up from the ground. Sorry, about 4.5 feet up from the ground. And essentially, it may not look like much, but these collars did their thing, capturing all the precipitation that was draining down the trunk of these trees. And so we got this information along with weather station data and used that to back calculate interception, and specifically interception as it was measured across each of these research sites. So I'm going to take you on a brief tour of these sites in northern Wilmington. And essentially, we have 3 sites of varying size and varying species composition. We're not going to get into the species composition piece of it all. What I want to focus our attention on tonight is just the interception totals. We're going to look at a large site, a medium-sized site, and a small site. And so we'll start at Alapocus Park. And this is the largest of our sites. And we can see here our interception maximum and minimum over the course of a 1.5 year period. So every time it rained, we took these measurements. And on average being this far right column, about 25% of all the rain that fell on this particular site was intercepted by the canopy. And that's pretty significant when we're thinking about precipitation that's not making it to the soil and potentially coming, or sidewalks, I should say, and potentially becoming runoff. Not far from Alapocus was Rockford Park. It's the medium-sized site in our study. And we'll look again just at interception for this part of the talk. And we'll see that the range was a little bit different here at Rockford. For one storm event, we had as much as 60% of the precipitation being intercepted by the canopy. And on average, much like at Alapocus, about 25% of all rainfall from a 1.5 years worth of data collection was intercepted by the canopy. And then we had one final site, tiny little woodlot behind the Delaware Art Museum. Same type of measurements took place, different type of range, but anywhere from 14 to about 47% of precipitation that fell on that woodlot was intercepted by the trees there, and about 27% on average. And so why does this matter? How can we start thinking about this from a urban forest management perspective? Well, regardless of size, these urban forest fragments were very efficient at intercepting precipitation. On average, about 26% of rainfall that fell on those canopies were intercepted. And it helps us when we have these numbers to be in a position to continue to make the case for conservation of these fragments and essentially for trees in total when we're thinking about what they can contribute to stormwater mitigation, specifically through rainfall interception. So that's looking at things on a kind of large, like plot size scale. What happens when we look kind of at like an individual tree scale? And really when we start looking at stem flow and the bark. And this is what we're going to kind of switch gears and look at now. So same concepts that we built on before, remembering that when it rains, you got 3 potential fates of that precipitation above ground. It can be intercepted, it can be transported or or diverted into through fall or redistributed as stem flow. So when we think about stem flow, you can look at this from like just the pure amount of water or like what's happening chemically to that precipitation that's interacting with the bark. We're not going to talk too much about the chemical reactions that take place today, but what I do want to bring your attention to is that there is an impact that's driven by the nature of the bark. And so, like we talked about earlier, if you have a rough bark tree versus a smooth bark tree, that's going to impact how effectively precipitation will be captured by and stored up in that bark or efficiently transported by the trunk, the bark, if you will. And so we wanted to really look and see, you know, first of all, of the species that were present in each of those woodlots, which species were present at all three? And then of those species, can we figure out if there's any like clear delineation between like the rough bark species and the smoother bark species? And so what we found is that at all three sites, there were a lot of white oaks, there were a lot of red oaks, and the bark characteristics between the two were different enough that we decided to use that as our basis for comparison. And so everything we talk about from here on out, we'll be looking at comparing white oaks to red oaks. Our red oaks are going to be the relatively smooth bark tree, not fully smooth, but relatively smooth, with these shallow linear furrows that we talked about earlier that are really affected at like transporting water or precipitation. And then on the converse, we had our white oaks. This is our like classic rough bark, kind of scaly. So now we're starting to think scaly, effective at intercepting precipitation, capturing it, locking it up. So what does this look like data-wise? Data collection-wise, same MO, same sites, same setup. And before we dive into the data, I wanted to show you this almost as a taste test of what's to come. This was a stem flow collector at one of the sites hooked up on one of our northern red oaks. And you can see here, we have our glorious collars and then our glorious trash cans to which any water that came down the tree trunk and fell into the collar was diverted to. And, you know, one of the things that comes up in a lot of people's mind is like, why in the world would anyone care about the water that's flowing down the trunk of a tree? It can't be that much water to begin with. Like, this conversation is going nowhere fast. But this picture kind of gives some proof to the opposite of that argument. As you'll see here, we had to actually install 2 stem flow collectors on this tree. The first of which could hold 32 gallons of precipitation, and the second of which could hold approximately 22 gallons of precipitation. And I say that to say that there were many a storm where there was so much stem flow being produced by this one tree alone that it would overflow from this 32-gallon trash can and into this 20-gallon trash can. So that's a lot of water if you think about it per storm. If we had 32 gallons of stem flow, everybody on tonight's call could comfortably go home with a 2-liter, well, not everybody, but almost everybody could go home with a 2-liter bottle of stem flow. I don't know why you would want to, but just to give a visual of how much was actually being generated. So just to let you know, when we measure stem flow, sometimes we think about it in terms of volume. And then sometimes we think about it separate of volume and using this metric called the funneling ratio. The funneling ratio is really important when we're thinking about stem flow, when we're thinking about precipitation interception by a tree, because what the funneling ratio tells us is if you have a tree that's present, there's going to be this much more water that makes it to the soil because that tree is present, or this much less water that makes it to the soil because this tree is present, specifically because of the precipitation that's being transported by the tree's bark, by the tree's trunk. And so with the funneling ratio, what we have is essentially a scale. It never gets less than 0. But between 0 and 1 is where the sweet spot is for that juicy information. If the funneling ratio value is less than 1, you've got a tree that is actually very effective at intercepting precipitation in the bark. It doesn't produce a whole lot of stem flow, water gets locked up in that bark, and that's about it. Not really going to be something that we have to consider in terms of runoff production. But if you have a funneling ratio value that's greater than 1, then what that tells us is there's actually more water making it to the soil because that tree is there than what would have happened if that tree was not planted. And so if we're thinking about rainfall capture by urban trees and determining which tree species may be greater contributors to that end goal, we might want to look at those species that have lower funneling ratios. And so that's what we did with this study. We compared the funneling ratios between red oaks and white oaks. And what I'm here to tell you today is that there were notable differences. So let's start on this. We're going to look again just within this red box, and we're going to start with the volume. So just to provide numbers that we think about on a daily basis, on average, our red oaks produced for like the whole of the study period about 26 liters of stem flow each storm. And the white oaks on the flip side, only about 2 liters per storm. So notable differences. That answers part of one of those questions we talked about earlier. But the juice right here that I want to talk about are these differences in the funneling ratios. And you can see for white oak, we have a funneling ratio that is what? Below 1, versus our red oaks, where this funneling ratio is notably larger than 1. And what we're seeing here is that this white oak was pretty superb at kind of capturing and locking up precipitation, because those funneling ratio values that are less than 1 mean that less water is making it to the surface because that tree is there. So this white oak might actually be pretty effective at intercepting precipitation, specifically in the bark. Whereas the red oak, not so much. It's actually going to be pretty efficient at draining precipitation. And that's all tied to those bark characteristics. So I'm going to speed through these for the sake of time so that we can leave enough time for questions. But I wanted to show you this data here is really chemical in nature. We're not going to get into that tonight. But what I do want to get into is the fact that the metric that's being displayed here is what we call a flux-based enrichment ratio. Again, we'll skip the definitions. I'm happy to answer questions about that later if there's time. But what I want to highlight is that this data basically talks about how much the chemistry of precipitation changes because it interacted with the bark, and then how much more of that chemically enriched precipitation makes it to the soil because a tree is there. And so the higher the values, the more chemical transport is taking place. And we've noticed those values on the y-axis of each of these graphs here. And what I want to share with you is that every graph that I'll show you for the next couple slides on the left is for red oak, and every graph on the right is for white oak. And you'll notice the axis values for the red oak far exceed those of the white oak. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. And essentially, this is telling us that the white oaks are not that great at pushing those chemical nutrients through because there's just not that much water that's being sort of pushed through via the stem. On the converse, red oaks are out here doing their thing. There's so much more water that's making it through the bark, if you will, of those trees as stem flow. And as a result, a greater flushing of essentially enriched precipitation to the soil. So we'll look at just these these y-axis values for the next two slides just to drive this point home. And you can again see the difference of red oak in the flush, if you want to think of it like that, and white oak in that flush. And it's always higher for the red than the white. This was for manganese, and then this was for sulfur. Again, notable differences, red versus white. And essentially, this brought us to the final conclusion that when it comes to physical tree traits and what that means for how trees interact with water and like how we can observe that physically and chemically, species matters. And species matters because there are differences in tree traits between our species. Lots of these traits, like we said, there's a dynamic list of traits and how they interact with each other. But for this last part of the results that we looked at, we're looking really at bark texture. And those differences in bark texture really do have an impact on the rainfall that makes it to the soil or that is essentially captured by the bark and intercepted effectively. So that's what we found. That was Delaware-based research. I'm so happy to share that we are continuing this in Michigan. Let's be honest, like white oak and red oak are fascinating species, but that's 2 out of so many. And so the work that we're doing in my lab right now is really trying to expand our data set to a growing number of species, with the hope of eventually not just limiting this research to the lab, but also getting community members involved in the collection of this data. And just so some photos of my students out in the field collecting this data, we are now looking at an additional 6 species, which doesn't seem like much, but for each species, we're collecting data from 10 trees, 10 mature trees, to determine, you know, how can we quantify the variation in bark roughness, and then how can we then link that to stem flow yield by those species. And you know, the student on the right here, Richard Rivera, is doing phenomenal research in this lane and is wrapping up his master's degree this spring. And we're hoping to make some new revelations on our findings a little later this year. One thing I'll share is that we're not the only ones doing this type of research. There are researchers around the world who have been looking at rainfall interception by urban trees and how it changes species to species. And so while we can't take time tonight to go into every study, I did want to just highlight this column here. And you can see for different tree species, just the range of values that you get in terms of interception, some as low as only 14% of rainfall being intercepted, and others as high as 71%. And so this, again, gives some credence to the fact that there's variation in what the species may contribute in terms of stormwater mitigation. And I also want to just quickly highlight that these trees are different in terms of their foliation period. And so you have some here, the BD stands for broadleaf deciduous, so trees that are going to essentially lose their leaves in the fall. And then you see we have some tree species here that were broadleaf evergreen, so they maintain their foliage throughout the year. They've got the broad leaves, so you may think of a holly oak tree. And then we have the coniferous evergreens, those trees that are conifers that maintain their needles throughout the year. And you can see the notable increase from the trees that lose their leaves at some point during the year and their interception totals versus those trees that maintain their foliation throughout the year and their interception totals. And again, this is the information that we really want to be taking note of when we think about if we're going to use these trees in our cities to help mitigate stormwater. We got to be thinking about all of these characteristics. How long is the length of the foliation period? What is that bark texture like? What are the leaf surfaces like? How is the canopy structure? What does it look like? Canopy architecture, all things that we have to be considering. And so all these things considered, and we're running down on our time. How do we apply this? At the end of the day, now we know, yes, species matters. There are different tree traits that are going to impact how well a tree can intercept precipitation or how well it drains it. And these tidbits of information can be used to really think about, all right, we know the rules now of right tree and right place. What does it mean when we're talking about this with respect to water resources? And so, you know, just being honest about urban areas, whether they're in Washtenaw County, and other places in Southeast Michigan, and other places of the US, our cities, even our more rural areas, are slowly but surely becoming all the more developed, or at least facing threats for development. And we see that in terms of the trends in urban population. We see that in terms of how urban population is kind of distributed across the United States. And we see the impacts of this, right? In terms of habitat for animals, and how that's kind of decreasing, air quality is decreasing, and the likelihood of and volumes of runoff are increasing. And so, of course, for our talk today, we're focusing mainly on this last little section with higher runoff due to urbanization. But all that in mind makes us think, how can we utilize green infrastructure, incorporating green spaces into our cities to reduce this type of occurrence, or the frequency with which it occurs. And so what we've been working on, we being some of my colleagues from the US Forest Service, Michigan State University, and the University of Delaware, is really seeing, now that we know all these things about, now that we've been able to identify which tree traits are effectively contributing to rainfall interception by the canopy. And we have an idea of some of the tree species that are, more or less effective, or at least we're starting to collect data to that end. Can we start writing prescriptions for urban tree selection? We're not there yet where we can write a full prescription and tell you which tree, because there's so many other factors to consider. But we can write a prescription in terms of thinking about what type of characteristics you should be considering if you want to utilize your urban canopy to reach these stormwater management or mitigation goals. And so some of the components of that prescription are going to guide you to be looking for trees that tend to have a higher LAI, that have leaves that have a lower hydrophobicities. We don't want those leaves that are kind of scared of water. We want the leaves that are going to retain it. We want to select those trees or even manage them in a way where we can maintain a higher canopy density, which is really linked to pruning practices to an extent. We also want to think about those trees that have that more intricate bark morphology, because that's going to really help to lock up that precipitation and store it rather than transport it to the surface where it can become runoff. And ultimately, we don't want a tree that's got a whole lot of funneling capacity. We don't want it to be having these high funneling ratios. Instead, we want a tree that's going to have a lower funneling ratio, which means it's not going to be that great at transporting water to the soil via the trunk. And so this is a little complex. It's kind of a work in progress, but we're starting to think about how do we use that prescription to create a roadmap that would help folks to have a better understanding of which tree species might be ideal if you want to utilize your canopy to help reduce stormwater in a city. All right, so that prescription I said is in the making. Hopefully we'll have it in a better shape, continue to improve on it as we get more data. But in the meantime, you may want to determine, how effective trees are in your municipality at mitigating stormwater, and what the economic value is affiliated with that particular service or other services. And I always like to end by promoting like practical ways that any of this can be applied. And I think the use of the iTree tool made available through the US Forest Service and Davey Tree and other partners is just a phenomenal way to get about getting that information about your urban forest. And so essentially iTree is an open source software package that can be used to determine the effectiveness of your urban canopy at providing benefits. If you have full-on inventory data, there's an iTree tool for that. If you don't and just have like aerial images of your city, there's an iTree tool that helps you to kind of get at those estimates just from that type of data. And all are very effective. I'll give you a quick taste test of some of the tools that are available through iTree. You have iTree Eco, iTree Design, iTree MyTree, and iTree Planting and iTree Landscape. They all have different functions. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that during the Q&A if there's time to. And you can see that within iTree, much like what we talked about today, you can get an idea of each of the species that are in a given city and use information about the size of that tree, the age of that tree, the health condition of that tree or that collection of trees, and how that ultimately will contribute to those species contributions to stormwater management or avoided runoff. And so this is just a really cool example of what an iTree report will look like and what it'll tell you about how individual tree species are contributing to stormwater mitigation. And just, let's end with a local example. This is straight from the Ann Arbor Urban Forest Management Plan. I love that management plan. I'm just gonna put it out there. One of my favorites, I always talk about it in my class, but I love it for so many reasons we don't have the time to get into tonight, but one of which is they used an older version of iTree to really get an understanding of, first of all, the distribution of species throughout the city, or I should say the composition of Ann Arbor's urban forest, which species are most popular. You can see our Acer or our maple species are sort of the most common, but then you also get an idea of the spatial distribution of trees and canopy cover across the city. And knowing this information, you can input that into your iTree tool of choice or really for this one, it would be like iTree Eco on the left and iTree Canopy on the right, something similar, to determine the relationship between the trees in Ann Arbor, the composition of those trees, in other words, which species are present, the structure, so the age and the health condition of those trees, and the percent canopy cover, and use that to get stormwater mitigation totals, both like an actual volume of runoff avoided because those trees are present, and an economic value associated with that service. So I encourage you all, if this is of interest and you want to start drawing connections between urban canopy cover in your municipality and stormwater mitigation by those trees, iTree is a great tool. And like I said, it's free and relatively easy to learn. I'm always happy to answer questions about that at any point in the future, if you like. And with that, I'm just going to close with a few points. I hope these kind of help seal the deal with what we talked about today. But first and foremost, stormwater mitigation by urban trees is indeed quantifiable and valuable, economically speaking. Stormwater mitigation capacity, the ability of a tree to help mitigate stormwater, is going to vary. And some of that variation is going to be based on the physical traits that characterize that tree, as well as the managerial practices, right? How many trees are we planting? How frequently are we pruning? What does that pruning do to the canopy density? All that said, it's important to understand how these tree traits are going to vary by species, and how that in turn might also change over time, right? So over the course of a year, we got these species that are going to drop their leaves. What does that do to interception? We might have a tree that's got rougher bark when it's more mature and smoother bark when it's less mature. What does that mean for interception, funneling ratios, and the like over the course of that tree? And how do we plan for that? How do we plan for that in our management strategies? And last but not least, great tools available to help you get some good baseline data about the trees in your community. And I'll even go as far as to say the trees in your back or front yard. You can use iTree for that as well, but it's available to help come up with some estimates about stormwater mitigation by your trees. I got an extra B there for benefits, because benefits are doubly awesome. And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone on my side who's been helpful through the years in making this work a reality. And with that, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. I'm very happy to take any that may come through.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dowtin. That was wonderful. I actually had the opportunity to hear you speak. I think it was at the Stewardship Network, like several years ago, pre-pandemic. But I feel like I still learned even more tonight hearing about your updated research. So I think we have a few questions that came through in the chat. The first one, I think maybe you answered this a little bit with your iTree overview, but the question is, are urban foresters using this research to make species decisions to promote rainfall capture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the answer is yes, not necessarily universally, but there is interest in this information. And so I actually got an inquiry just yesterday from an out-of-state urban forester who wanted to know if we had equations in place that would allow us to predict stem flow yield for trees, because they wanted to use that to determine which trees they were going to plant in pits that had like less porous soils versus those that didn't. So that's an absolute yes. And then local to like Southeast Michigan, we have a budding partnership right now with the Forest Service and some local community groups where we're looking at identifying what tree species are going to do best given what the city allows, and how that is going to essentially determine where we can maximize this interception by the canopy.
Great. I think the next question we had was just someone wanted to know a little bit more about how the collars actually capture that stem flow for coarser barks.
Yeah. So with the collars, what we have is essentially it's like this very malleable PVC tubing, and you take the tubing, you cut it in half, almost like a Y. If you can imagine, it's cut like a Y, and then you wrap it around the trunk of the tree. Now you got to get it in place. Some controversial methods used on that. The trees that we did that on, we have permission to actually staple them in place. And so you have a part of the collar that butts up to the trunk, and it's almost like a connection, but there's still these gaps that exist between the collar and the bark. And so you actually go through again with a layer of silicone sealant, like you would use in like laying grout in your bathroom. And you use that sealant to close the gaps between the bark and the tubing. And what you get there is essentially a sealed pathway through which precipitation makes its way down the trunk, hits the ceiling, not the ceiling, the sealant, and then trickles down into the collar. And from there, once you set the collars up, you do it, it's like a Y, but you set them up on an angle, and that angle promotes drainage. And when I tell you it was efficient, like there were several storms where we had more than 121 liters of precipitation, which is about that like 32, 33 gallon range. But all of that was effectively drained through those collars.
Great. Was that a technique that your lab came up with, or was it something that had been used before?
It's been used before. There's crazy things. People will have used like bits and pieces of like toilets from East Germany to collect stem floats. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think we might have time for one or two more. Let's see. Do the trees that have superior precipitation capturing traits, do they naturally occur in more xeric ecosystems? Have you noticed any kind of trend in that?
That's a great question. And that's actually one of the studies that we're working on now. We have found that they do actually tend to thrive in those environments. And so it's pretty interesting. What we're looking at now is we have a site where we have a significant amount of beech trees that are very effective at generating this stem flow, but they're not far from white oaks and red maples. And so we're trying to understand what is this interplay that's allowing all these trees to thrive relatively close to each other, yet be so different.
I think hopefully we can just do one last question. It's the difference between, I guess, do the difference in nutrient flushing mean that it's valuable to have a mix of trees that capture a lot of moisture via stem flow and those that capture less? So for example, should urban foresters aim to have both red oaks and white oaks?
It's a good question. I think we have to think even more broadly about the answer, because with that flushing of precipitation and nutrients, you're getting, from a chemical perspective, what we call biogeochemical hotspots. And so that flushing can actually mean, if we're looking at pollutants, an increased flushing of pollutants to the soil, and that can have negative ramifications on tree health, tree vigor. And so I think it ultimately goes back to what we talked about up front about having a mix of species. To the person's question, it's important to diversify as much as you possibly can, because each species is going to display its own level of vulnerability to different aspects of the urban environment, different responses to inundation of the root zone or lack thereof. And having a diversity of species, you're going to be able to identify which trees will do best based on what they're exposed to in different parts of the city.
Excellent. Thank you. That's the end of the questions. And thank you again for a great presentation. I will hand it back to Jill.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Asia Dowtin. Thank you for the great questions and the great answers as well. We will move on in our program to 2021 Washtenaw County Conservation District successes now. And to take that away, we will have our year in review by Megan Delau, our Executive Director.
Thanks, Jill. And thank you again, Dr. Dowtin. That was fascinating and my mind is reeling right now. And I have so many questions, so I'll definitely be watching that again, personally. As Jill mentioned, my name is Megan DeLue. I serve as the Executive Director for Washtenaw County Conservation District, and I just celebrated my 4th year anniversary with the district. I just want to take a moment to thank the Board of Directors and the Conservation District staff and all of our local partners in contributing to making 2021 such a successful year. We'll take a few moments to highlight our 2021 successes, and I really want to emphasize and direct you towards our 2021 community report, which you see a few highlights pictured here. It is available for free and includes more detailed information about upcoming events, details about dates that you shouldn't miss, as well as order forms for the tree and plant sales. And I encourage you to pick up a copy to learn more about what the WCCD has to offer. You could request a mailed copy of the report, download a PDF from our website, or even drop by the office to pick one up. Our annual meeting program, which was linked in the registration email, so you can pop back and check that out. That includes staff contact and information about the district, and as well as our office address. You can find all of that also on our website. 2021 was a really big year for Washtenaw County Conservation District. It was the first year after the passage of the millage in summer of 2020. We have focused on building our organizational capacity to serve more residents with conservation on the ground. Our staff grew to 6, which was previously a staff of 2, and we welcomed several new board directors as well. A few highlights that I want to mention. Now I'm thinking about tree bark here. We greatly increased our resource distributions. Thousands of trees, shrubs, and plants were planted by residents as a result of our sales. And these trees and plants provide a whole host of environmental benefits, some of which were mentioned earlier by Dr. Dowtin, increasing water retention, reducing soil erosion, increasing wildlife habitat, creating wind barriers, a lot more. And as you can see, we had a significant increase from 2020 up to 2021. The native plant distribution in particular was our largest distribution to date. And I also want to call out and highlight our online store, which received a major overhaul in 2021 and is now very user-friendly and includes details about species and planting instructions. And there's a lot of great information on there. And Doug Reith, our resource coordinator, has been the designer and implementer of that lovely resource. Go to the next page. Thank you. We launched the rain barrel program, resulting in 183% increase in both the number and of rain barrels distributed and water collected. COVID-19 restrictions didn't stop our educational efforts. In 2021, 923 individuals engaged in our educational webinars and in-person forest walk. And you can see we've had a great increase in volunteer engagement, in big part thanks to our partners at the Water Resources Commissioner's Office at Washtenaw County. And we also created our first ever Volunteer of the Year award. And finally, we focused on building existing and new partnerships in 2021, and we want to thank all of our partners for the critical work that they do and for working with us to increase conservation efforts in Washtenaw County. Please make sure to check out our website, our Facebook page, YouTube site and sign up for our e-newsletter so you can stay up to date with all of our 2022 programs and events. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, for those good updates. Next, we'll hear from our meat technician, Nick Machinsky.
Thank you, Jill. As she said, my name is Nick Mashinsky. I'm the meat technician here at Washtenaw County. I've been here for about 5 years now, I believe, losing track of time. And we'll start with the meat program, the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program. It was another great year. We had 17 total verifications on 11 different farms. 9 of those were new producers or landowners, new to the program, that is, which is fantastic. Our 212 risk reductions or environmental concerns addressed, that's also a new record. And as you can see, a lot of that comes from our habitat system. So a lot of people very interested in getting into their woods and woodlots and managing those, which is great to see. Looking forward, we have a lot of re-verifications to do this year. Re-verifications are up every 5 years. So we had a good number of those, and the pandemic has slowed re-verifications down over the past couple of years. So that has left a backlog, which means I'm very busy, which is great. We're going to focus new verifications in the Western Lake Erie Basin, or the WLEB, which is really the southern half of Washtenaw County, really. Next slide, please. And I'll talk now about the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, and our conservation technician, Aries Brandvain, really focuses on that program. These are his numbers specifically, not all of NRCS. Just over 1,200 acres enrolled, and the most popular practices were cover crops, conservation cover, and leaving tall residue on the fields. Of course, those are not all the practices that are available. There's many, many more. And next we have the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or more popularly known as EQIP. 122 acres have been enrolled into that program in the past fiscal year. Again, a wide range of practices, everything from forestry to cover crops to seasonal high tunnels and pollinator habitats. Those were all established and approved. All right, next slide, please. Finally, we have the Stoney Creek Watershed Management Plan. And this is mainly to, or it is to address the Stoney Creek watershed that flows at the southeastern end of our county. It actually is a part of Wayne County and Monroe as well. And if you look at a watershed map, you'll see a lot of the watersheds within the county are, well, they have larger nonprofits associated with them, and Stoney Creek has sort of been left out over the years. And so we decided we should do something about that. It's got several impairments, such as E. coli, habitat alteration, and suspended solids flowing through it. And so we were awarded a grant from Eagle to write a watershed management plan for this creek. And so we've already started on that. We are going to do the tillage survey actually within the next couple of weeks, pollutant source assessment or a stream walk next fall, as well as some water sampling and survey of the inhabitants of the watershed as well. So a very exciting project, and I'm glad to be a part of it. That is all I have, Jill. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Lastly, we'll hear from our community forester, Summer Roberts.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be reporting on the 2021 resource assessment. Every 5 years, WCCD performs a resource assessment where we survey residents across Washtenaw County, and are trying to learn their top natural resource concerns, as well as how WCCD can help them. So we have a pretty new staff, and this was our first experience running this survey. We learned a lot along the way. In 2021, we made some updates to the survey design, and we decided to make a really concerted effort to broaden the reach of the survey. So for context, in 2016, WCCD emailed 2,574 residents who were in our database, and we received 129 responses for about a 5% response rate. And as you can see, in 2021, we released over 11,000 surveys, of which 6,000 were mailed to randomly selected residents across the county. And we received a total of 948 responses, which is a response rate a little over 8%. And although we fell short of getting a statistically significant result for our randomly sampled residents, over half, I think it was almost actually 75% of the residents who did respond to that mailed survey were either not aware of WCCD or kind of unsure who we were exactly, or if they'd used any of our programs. So we definitely feel that we're making some progress towards better capturing the views and needs of the entire county while also promoting our services and getting our name out there. In 2021, we also redesigned some of the survey questions to try to better ensure that staff could use the results of the survey to design programs and events. And so with respect to the natural resource concerns, oh, sorry, Jill, we're still on the first one. So with respect to natural resource concerns, respondents indicated that land use was their top concern, and particularly the growth of development and zoning regulations. Their second concern were forests and woodlots, and specifically looking at disease, pollution, invasive species, as well as fragmentation and just management of private lands. And respondents' third top natural resource concern was water, specifically surface and groundwater management, as well as protection as well as stormwater management. All right, next slide. Thank you, Jill. So in addition to looking at natural resources and what those concerns were, we wanted to know how WCCD could help. So the number one kind of program category that respondents indicated they would want to see more WCCD action in was partner to protect land. And that included individual technical assistance where WCCD staff would provide guidance on land protection and conservation options, conservation practices, and cost share programs, as well as connecting landowners with new farmers. So basically WCCD could help assist with some of the succession of agricultural lands and ensure that beginning farmers can find existing farmland. The second category was an increase in community resources. And by and far away, the winner there was expanding the tree, shrub, and native plant sales. And I think Megan showed in her slide that we really took that to heart, and we have been trying to expand it. Definitely just some constraints in what we can get from nurseries there, as well as staffing. But we are taking that to heart, and we're doing our best to ramp those up. Residents also indicated that they'd like to see additional services and resources provided. Soil testing as well as cover crop seed were some possibilities that came up. And actually this past fall, we did our first soil testing drive. I think we prepped for about 200 samples and we got 300. So that was also a resounding success, and a lot of residents really appreciated that service. Residents also indicated that they'd like to see an interactive database of resources, and I think that's probably going to be part of a larger update to the WCCD website that the staff has been talking about internally. So we are thinking about that and how we can make our resources more accessible and easier to navigate. And finally, the tool and equipment rental program was something that respondents were excited about, specifically looking at a no-till drill rental or tree planting equipment, looking at hand tools such as dibble bars and shovels. And that is my wrap up for the 2021 resource assessment. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Summer. Next up, we have our director elections. We'll be electing 3 directors tonight, 2 for 4-year terms and 1 for a 3-year term. The candidates are Howard Zeiss, Shannon Brines, Hannon Weber, and Matt Nolan. More information on the candidates and current board directors can be found on the website, washtenaw.cd.org. Absentee ballots for this election were due at 12 p.m. today, and 2 volunteers have agreed to assist this evening as polling officials at the office. So the polling officials will now count the ballots, and we will announce the results of the election following the awards portion of this evening. So next, for the highlight of the evening, the presentation of the Conservation Farmer of the Year, Tree Conservationist, Small or Beginning Conservation Farmer, and Volunteer of the Year awards. Tonight, Era's Brandvain, our conservation technician, will present our first award for the evening.
Okay, good to talk to everyone. So this guy is not with us tonight, but he is with us in spirit. Great guy. So this award, the 2021 Walter Wolfgang Memorial Conservation Farmer of the Year, goes to Lee Malbec. So for those of you who don't know Lee, he's a pretty cool guy, very quiet and soft-spoken, but also he's not afraid to just explain what he thinks and why. And in the case of conservation, that's a pretty cool thing. So I just want to talk about him for a few minutes. So in this job and in a few previous jobs, I've been on a lot of farms, and I've seen a lot of things. And sometimes when I go to a farm, or when Nick goes to a farm, farmers are sometimes not too thrilled about showing us around, because maybe they'll be something they're a little nervous about showing us. But in the case of Lee, this guy is so passionate about what he does and the way that he does it. And I have never seen somebody so excited about sharing that with me. So I met Lee. I went out there. He was very interested in learning and developing his program. He does farm about 1,435 acres. Some of that ground he just picked up recently. So that's a lot of acreage to farm, and for someone farming that much, it's really important to be mindful of how they're managing natural resources. So as far as that goes, there could not have been a more appropriate winner of this award. So Lee farms with his sons. They also follow right in his footsteps. The things that I've learned about Lee is that from when he kind of started farming, he always wanted to do things the right way, not for any recognition, not for any points, not to get payments on anything, just because he wants it to be.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Well, my watch is
I'm having trouble
a
hearing
robot. That's crazy. Okay, so Lee, yeah, he just wants to do things the right way because it's the right way, not for any other specific reason. So we can go to the next slide, Jill. So Lee is involved in a lot of Nrcs programs, and as a partner of Nrcs, I get to work with participants directly on that. So he's been he's had over 5 contracts between EQIP and CSP, 2 programs that Nick referred to. I started working with Lee in the CSP program, and that program is really designed to bring recognition from Nrcs, from that program, to farmers who already do an outstanding job. So CSP stands for Conservation Stewardship Program. So Lee he exemplifies what it means to be a steward of conservation. He does all these things. So the deal with CSP, we recognize farms who are already doing a great job, and then in exchange, they kind of take their conservation efforts up a notch or 2. So in this case, what we have pictured is through Lee's CSP contract, one of the practices that he has signed up for and contracted to do is leaving corn residue at least 14 inches tall. And the reason for that is for soil coverage and to have some sort of habitat for terrestrial habitat to kind of take shelter in over the winter. So it's a pretty common practice, but it's something Lee kind of did already. And this was a way by meeting that 14-inch threshold to really take that conservation up a notch. So I went out there and you know, he sometimes it's a little, there's some teeth pulling to get farmers to do things, you know, because they've got to make adaptations and changes. But yeah, Lee was more than excited to do this. And you know, these are changes that farmers need to make to meet their, it's not always easy. It doesn't always meet their management styles and their management plans. So it was nice to see Lee be really enthusiastic about this one. And it's nice to be able to go out and just see that a farmer enjoyed doing the practice. And Jill, you can go to the next slide. So another one that Lee is contracted to do, which he has been under contract for several years in several different programs, is a good old cover crop. So Lee does as good of a job as anyone else. Something cool about Lee is that he really, every acre of the farm will get covered. That's the goal every year, regardless of if they did corn or beans. He will always follow that with cover crop, and he'll drill it in, or he'll have it flown on aerially, but one way or another, he'll get it covered. And that's, you know, when we talk about addressing resource concerns, cover crop, we hear that thrown out a lot, but this is someone who talks the talk and he walks the walk. He makes it a priority to get every acre covered, whether he's in a NRCS program or not. It's going to happen, and it does happen. So those are just a few pictures. So that's pretty much the deal with Lee. Great guy to work with. You know, as I've kind of grown into this role, there have been a lot of farms who have been really good to work with, and he was someone who welcomed the opportunity for me to work with him. So could not think of a more deserving winner for this award. And there you go. That's Lee.
Thank you, Aris. Thank you for those very kind words about Lee. Let's move on to our tree conservationist of the year. And that will be representing our community forester, Summer Roberts, will present.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of meeting Kurt Tidwell for the first time just last fall. And I visited his 6-acre agroforestry easement, which was established about 5 years ago, located just south of the Conn Nature Preserve in Sylvan Township. And at that time, Kurt had roughly 300 plants on his site, including Chinese chestnuts, hazelnuts, wild American plums, and pawpaws. And I'm sure that's grown since then. But it was great and fascinating to walk the easement with Kurt and learn about his vision for the site. He would really love to see an expansive botanical garden focused on climate adaptive plants that would also support a wild type edible business. So he's working towards that goal. And he actively seeks out specimens that will produce viable seed, so he can not only sell, you know, fruit to the local community, but continue to sell the seed and to encourage others to plant trees and to be able to grow their own food. So next slide, Jill. This is just kind of a picture of some of the rolling expanse of the easement that Kurt has, some of his Chinese chestnuts pictured. And I just want to talk a little bit about Kurt's journey to where he is now. As a child, he was exposed to ornamental plants at his mother's garden design business, and that really encouraged a deep love of nature and plants in general. And he continued to seek out opportunities to learn more about nature, agriculture, and sustainable systems, such as permaculture, biodynamic farming, agroforestry, and also indigenous horticultural techniques that he learned through work experiences in California and Nicaragua. And when California and Nicaragua. Yep. And upon his return to Michigan, Kurt worked for Richard Andres and Deb Lentz at Tantray Farm for a while. That's a family-run operation that's just up the road from his easement. And when Richard learned of Kurt's aspiration to have this botanical garden, wild type edible business, he kindly introduced him to Dave and Sharon Brooks, who were neighbors with about like 80 acres of property and a history of conservation. And so in 2017, Kurt and Dave were able to reach an agreement, and Kurt has been on that land since. So next slide, Jill. So I included these photos that Kurt sent me just of the surrounding landscape because it was so evident, walking around with him, he clearly loved the land that his easement was on and was adjacent to, and really is a steward of the land. And so I just wanted to show a picture of some of the oak hickory forest. I know there's a button bush wetland kind of to the south of his easement, and the headwaters of Mill Creek are connected, and beautiful pitcher plant. So it was very evident that Kurt had a deep love and appreciation for that land, and it was really excited to share it with me. We talked about all the kind of different features of the land and all the techniques that he's been trying to live in harmony with the land. Next slide, Jill. And so really Kurt's aspirations and love for the land, they're only rivaled by his respect and gratefulness for the people who have guided him along this journey. When we were together last fall on his property, he mentioned a lot of different people and organizations that have helped him get to where he is, but he specifically credited Richard Andres and the Brooks as being integral to the process and helping him to where he is now. So I just want to say, WCCD is very grateful for community members that support one another and help to make these kinds of beautiful dreams come true and support efforts of community conservation. And so with that, I'd like to say congratulations to Kurt Tidwell, the WCCD's 2021 Tree Conservationist of the Year. And Kurt, I think I saw you on here, so if you would like to say a few words, you're more than welcome to pop on now.
Hello. I'm not sure if anybody can see me.
You're good. We got you.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, this is actually my first Zoom experience. So thanks so much. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. It's been great being able to meet people coming out, Erez and Nick and Summer. And yeah, super just grateful to be able to be out here on this land. It really is an amazing ecosystem here with the peatlands and the tamaracks, and yeah, just this is a high point in Washtenaw County. There's like rivers in every direction, so water flows kind of away from here in a lot of ways, and I'm just super fascinated, and I was really happy to hear everything in the talks that have gone on so far. It's been educational. I have so much more to learn, so thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you for saying some kind words, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Next up, we will talk about the 2021 Small or Beginning Conservation Farmer of the Year. And Erez Brandvain will go ahead and take that away again.
All right. So just to wrap up the Kurt piece, Kurt is another farmer that I had the pleasure of working with through the CSP program, and just a great guy, fun guy to be around, hard worker, passionate about what he does. So congratulations to Kurt. Okay, so moving forward here, the 2021 Small or Beginning Conservation Farmer of the Year goes to, drum roll, you already know it because it's on your screen, the Whitney Farmstead. So let me say that the Whitneys are incredibly close friends of mine. We went to college together, but even if that were not the case, I could not think of a farm that would be more deserving of this award specifically. So the Whitneys are pretty unique. And when you hear people say that they build things by themselves, or they use their own two hands to make something happen, this is the epitome of that. So Matthew and Malika, they met at college. We all went to college together in Vermont, believe it or not. And we hit it off and became good friends. And then, life happened. We all went our separate ways. And then a few years later, I got to come work here. And luckily there was an opportunity to work with the Whitney farmstead. So the Whitneys do a fantastic job. Again, I've been on several farms, and I have yet to see a farm do rotational grazing as well as they do. So when we talk about conservation, that comes through in a lot of different ways, right? We talked about the cover crops. We had that great presentation on water, and Kurt does a great job of conservation with planting trees. The way that the Whitneys practice conservation is by grazing animals, and Nick had a great virtual field day on that whole topic about a year ago. But that can be a whole field day that we do, or a whole talk. But grazing is not an easy thing. It requires a high level of commitment. You need to go out to your fields every single day and move the herds. The Whitneys, they don't just have one herd. They don't have two herds. They have several herds. They have a dairy herd, and they have a beef herd, and they have sheep. So here you can see some animals taking a short break from a hard day's work of grazing. It's tough work, and sometimes you got to just kind of take a breather. So there's a few things that I wanted to just highlight about them. Again, CSP participants. And remember, I did speak a little bit about how CSP, the point of CSP is to reward and kind of recognize and work with farms who already do an exemplary job of conservation. As you can see in these photos, especially these two little critters down here, grazing on the bottom left side of your screen. They do as good of a job as anyone with the grazing. So when I had the chance to first work with them, as putting my conservation technician hat on, I immediately knew that this was the program for them, because they already have a grazing plan written through Nrcs. They meet all the criteria. They were good to go. So just to kind of give one more recap, they've got several herds of animals. They have a micro dairy herd share, which is pretty unique. I'm not going to say too many details, but if you're curious about that, you can look their website up and get a hold of Malika. It's pretty unique. They sell beef at the farm and also at the farmers market through most weekends. So that's the business model, and they also are a great center for community activity. So they've all frequently got ice skating. They have events where they raise barns. As I said, these people do things with their hands. So that's the story with the Whitneys. There's one very important thing that I need to mention about them in this evening in this award. So there's an article that is in our newsletter about them in this award. And the Whitneys, Matthew and Malika, they are actually not the first Whitneys to win this specific award. Malika's grandfather his name was Gilbert. He passed away a few years ago, but he has left a legacy in Webster Township and this whole community of conservation. So he won this award 19 years ago. He won a conservation award through the Washtenaw Conservation District. So I don't know if this is the first time or if it's happened before, but I think it's a really, really special and unique thing that a conservation award has been won by the same family, but different generations. So I think that's just a really cool thing. And that really speaks volumes to the ethic that Gilbert had passed on to his family. And when I have done my conservation work through NRCS and I look up Whitney information, there is always historical records of Gilbert. So it's really cool. It's really nice to see that. And I know that made Malika really happy. Unfortunately, Malika couldn't join us tonight. So they've got some hockey commitments. They've got a little nice skating rink over there. She really wanted to be here, but they just couldn't swing it tonight. But yeah, they do an amazing job. They are conservation stewards, and they just really deserve this award. They are not people who like the spotlight, and they're very humble. And so this, getting them this recognition was something that they were excited about, but yeah, sometimes you just gotta really tell them that they're appreciated and their work means a lot. So that's all we got for the Whitneys.
Thank you, Erez. And congratulations, Malika Whitney and Matthew Harlow for your award.
Yes.
Thank you. Next up, finally, the resource coordinator, Doug Reith, will present our Volunteer of the Year Award.
Hi everyone, I'm Doug, the resource coordinator, and this 2021 doesn't need to be said, but continuing to be a challenging year for in-person events. We had canceled many events and reduced events in 2020, so our 2021 events came back with a lot of challenges, and the volunteers came back coming up to those challenges and exceeded that. And as Megan said earlier, we had a huge amount of volunteers this year that really made our events possible. We couldn't do it without them. And really through all of that, we had multiple events through the year. One person was there for basically everything we did that volunteers could be involved in. And not only with consistency, but dedication, humor, plant knowledge, and amazing sense of style. And so we wanted to honor Linda, who we'll bring in here shortly, as the first Volunteer of the Year award for 2021. Some people might know Linda as a retired middle school teacher living in Ann Arbor. Many of us know her as a very enthusiastic plant enthusiast. She has massive native plant gardens in her front and backyard, and has been involved with the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commission Master Rain Garden Program for over 8 years. And as legend has it, she was asked to take some photos for the rain garden program. And she said she'll do it till she's bored, and that was 8 years ago. So she hasn't got bored yet and continues to be enthusiastically excited to learn about native plants and be supporting these programs. Through the Master Rain Garden program, she had grown as a volunteer, photographing events and coordinating school rain gardens and supporting the staff various events, and including Ann Arbor River Days. She has also taken classes on landscape design. In 2019, Linda received the certification from the MSU Conservation Stewards Program, receiving some mentorship from KDW, the Master Rain Garden Program, and Megan, our executive director. And since then, she's been active as well with the Wildflower Association of Michigan since 2018, and was elected onto that board in 2021. So we'll go forwards here. Yep. And to say the least, like I mentioned, she was involved in basically everything that we do with volunteer opportunities. Our spring tree and shrub sale, which was, if you were there, it took a lot of heart and hustle. And she was one of the many volunteers that made that happen. Same with the Native Plant Expo and distribution, which she acts as well on the planning committee for that. And she joined in for our first school community habitat grant, reviewing the applications and helping advise on those grant awards. And then she was there too for the fall tree sale, native plant sale. And pictured here, I believe that's the Native Plant Expo, her and I carrying some trays of plants back and forth. And And she has a long history, like I said, with the rain garden program. I think that we have, I'm gonna look around here. We might have Susan Bryan on if she'd like to mention a little bit about.
I invited her as a panelist, Doug.
Okay.
So she should be unmuted now.
I'm looking, there she is. So Susan, we'd love for you to chime in with your experience working with Linda.
I'm honored to talk about Linda Priestkorn because she has been a volunteer with us for so many years. And I feel like every event, not only is she a tireless worker, a big help, but also she always takes beautiful photographs. And in this day and age, it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's funny because she helps us so much. And then every year she takes those photographs and turns them into greeting cards so that, you know, we can give thank you notes to other volunteers and just pays it forward with her own photography. So they're beautiful, and it just, you know, helps us represent, and they always feature nature. So it helps us represent, you know, the beautiful nature to other volunteers and just pay it forward. I'm just so happy to have worked with Linda over all these years, and she just makes it fun with her dry sense of humor. She always has an acerbic comment, and I'm just so thrilled to have worked with her over the years.
Thank you, Susan. And I also, it's just been, she's a fun person to work with when we're, you know, there was a motto for one of the events that don't let Doug's head explode. And Linda's one of those people that was there that helped keep things calm and be a energy that leveled things out. And I want to say too, that when I had asked her about why she volunteers for the WCCD events, she said that the events are a good chance to meet people, be active, and learn seedlings. And she learned as much about plants at these events as she has from books. And so it's really encouraging to see Linda and all the other volunteers who come together and really build community around what we do and make the events possible. So like Susan said, her humor, her knowledge, her enthusiasm, she's been an amazing person to work with. And so we'd love to invite Linda on. We've got her here. Linda, if you want to unmute, you can accept your award.
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Sounds good. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too, and I'm honored to accept this first award. Everything I've done with the rain gardens and the conservation sales and everything has been because I love to be around the plants. I love to be around the people, but it also has a little bit to do with the fact that I was a teacher and I couldn't quit learning when I retired, and this gives me an opportunity to keep on learning. And I can't thank all of you enough for every opportunity you've given to me. Thank you. And I'll show you this lovely, here's the lovely award. Can you see it?
You've earned it. Thank you, Linda.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Linda.
Thank you.
So much. All right, lastly, our director elections. I do have the results. Our polling volunteers have now tallied the absentee ballots, and I have the results. It is Shannon Brines and Hannah Weber. Hannah Weber will be serving 4-year terms, and Matt Nolan will be serving a 3-year term. Congratulations to our newly elected directors. Now for the door prize drawing. Summer will randomly select from a list of participants. And let's take it away, Summer.
All right. So the first random name that I've pulled is Brooks Curtis. Brooks, are you on tonight? And maybe he can't respond, but.
I just unmuted you, Brooks, if you want. You don't have to, but we'll follow up with your email and we'll send you, what's the first prize? I think it's a gift certificate to our store.
Woohoo!
Correct. It's a $10 gift certificate to the Washtenaw County Conservation District spring sale.
Better use that quickly. I've heard plants are flying off the shelves.
The second prize is also one of those. So
All right, so the second name that I pulled was Karen Wanstrom, but I did not see her on. So I'm gonna keep going down the list if there's no Karen. Looks like the next name I pulled was John Cox. Is John on?
I'm here. Yeah,
Great. Congratulations, John.
thank you.
All right, we will follow up with you for your door prize. Is there another one, Jill?
Yes, there is. The next is one land loom t-shirt from Hannah Weber.
All right. Let's see, the next name that I have is Barry Lonick. But I don't see him on here. Going once, Barry. Going twice. All right, the next name is Meg Delaney. I don't see her either. Speak, Meg, if you're out there. No? Okay. The next
could it
name
be
I
for
have
any Megan?
is
I'm just kidding.
it's close. Meg Delaney and let's see. The next name I have is Paul Schisler.
I think the only two attendees we have left, there's two. I don't know if you have to narrow it down to random from one of those two,
Let's see.
other than the ones who've already won.
You know, I don't think they were even on my list. So I think let me just add them quickly. And
This is still going to be one of the situations where there's more prizes than people. So everybody's a winner.
that's great. Okay. So great. Next name, Larry Becker.
We can follow up with Larry. He's unmuted.
All right, Larry, I think you won a fabulous t-shirt. You should have a model.
And then lastly, Summer, there are some honey from Rustic Roots Farm. So that can go to our remaining attendees, since I think we have enough to cover everybody.
Perfect. Thanks, Jill.
So thank you. And I will say thank you to everybody for attending the 74th Annual Conservation District meeting. Thank you again.